sing a few songs. We had a morning song. What? Yeah, let's sing the Avalokiteshvara chant sometime. Join in as you feel comfortable. Namo Avalokiteshvaraya. Namo
Hello, everyone. Hello again, everyone. Good to be with you this weekend, especially as I've gotten to know some more of you through our Dharma sharing time. Also good to have some space to offer a few reflections. For those of you who don't know me, Eric said my name is Kim. I've been living here at Mariposa for the last year and working the last couple of years on a master's degree in Buddhist studies. So I've been trying my hand at writing some Dharma talks. But mostly I'm here today because when I try to get out of it, Joanne sent me an email that said I really should keep going. So that's another reason why I'm here. The theme for our retreat has been homecoming. That process of returning to oneself and taking a seat within oneself in order to be resourced and restored. Yesterday, Joanne shared with us some reflections on the importance of grounding in the body when practicing mindfulness. She also emphasized becoming familiar with that place of spacious, easeful, resourced awareness. She spoke of how this space should gladden our body and mind. And that this is a space that is able to meet our suffering as it arises, meet it appropriately. It's able to give our suffering what it needs in order to release. So today I'd like to expand on this idea that our practice should indeed offer restoration. Particularly, I'd like to share a handful of sutra texts that support this idea. So I just graduated from this master's degree in Buddhist studies, as I said, and the mantra there was, you always have to support your ideas about practice by grounding them in textual evidence. So I've become habituated to providing textual evidence. But this is actually a good thing. The sutras are a rich font of wisdom. I think reading them is beneficial, part of our practice. But getting back to this idea that our practice should indeed offer restoration. I don't know about you all, but I have a tendency to be hard on myself. I can easily fall into that belief that the spiritual journey is very serious business. It sure seems like serious business. After all, we seek out spiritual practice because we are suffering. Our own personal suffering can range from simple everyday annoyances to profound mental and physical distress. There is also the suffering of injustice that we see in the world around us. This was true in, quote, normal times, if not especially true during this time of the pandemic. So, given that suffering is a real thing, and by real I mean life can seriously hurt sometimes, it seems to us like our response to this should be equally as serious. Speaking for myself here, I habitually think I've got to get to work on this problem. I've got to bring all of the discipline I can muster, really get in there and fix things. I've got to fix myself, and I'm going to fix the world. Today in this talk, I want to suggest that the place of practice that actually relieves suffering, and by extension heals the world, is a much more pleasant, relaxed, restorative, and redemptive space than we might have imagined. And I want to emphasize this because I have labored many years under mistaken notions of practice as mostly a path of discipline and just kind of bearing it. Joanne spoke yesterday about some of us having the tendency to white knuckle it in meditation. That's my type for sure. Here's a story from my own life that will confirm that. I practiced for many years with the Soto Zen community up in Portland area. And in that tradition, I had done many 7-day silent retreats. And these can be rather intensive. There's a lot of sitting, usually about 10 hours a day or so. And the body can really get tired and stiff. The back and knees can experience a good deal of pain. So in this story from my life, I was at the beginning of one of these retreats. And I was anticipating having to arouse a lot of discipline in order to endure the physical pain. And it was with this mindset that I went in to speak for the first interview with the guiding teacher. And I came in and I was just like jaw set, you know, but kind of resigned, and I'm sure with a tone of depression that said, I'm ready to be disciplined about this. And the teacher responded lightning fast in that kind of classic Zen koan way, like, he said, there's no discipline in this. What? I said, you don't get it. I'm ready to suffer. Nope, he said. You're wrong. The mind that we are cultivating in practice is not one of suffering. Which is kind of what Buddha says, right? This mind is easeful and spacious, warm and relaxed. I was taken aback. I couldn't imagine that you could get through so many hours of sitting without resignation to pain. So in that moment, a long-held belief of mine began to crack. His challenge to me was a turning point, an opening to a completely new approach to practice. More importantly, the beginning of an actual practice of ease. Yeah, you can do 10 hours of pain, or you can do 10 hours of practicing ease. As it turns out, I'm not the only one who has made this mistake. Famously, the Buddha made this mistake also. Except the Buddha took it to much more of an extreme. As I said, I want to reference several sutras in this talk. A lot of the talk is mostly sutras, and that's because they're just so deliciously descriptive about some of the trouble we can get into. As you'll see, as well as descriptive of the solution. So if you will recall from the story of the Buddha, he was looking for a way out of suffering that seemed to be all around him, suffering that was an inescapable part of being alive. So first he tried indulging his senses. He did that to an extreme also. By all accounts, before the Buddha left home, he was the ultimate playboy. Palaces, sport, women. Everybody was oh so beautiful. Every night was a party. But that didn't work. It didn't lead to lasting satisfaction. He still suffered. So he thought, there's got to be something else. So next, the Buddha tries the opposite extreme. He practices extreme forms of self-mortification. I like how human the Buddha is in this. How relatable. Because I think I at least am like that. If it's not one extreme, it's the other. If I'm not like all right, I must be all wrong. If you're not all right, maybe I shouldn't have been friends with you in the first place. We go to extremes. It's hard to find that sweet spot, that zone of resiliency that Joanne was talking about. It's also kind of comforting to know that the Buddha, the very best of humans, also worked with this tendency to miss the mark. At any rate, here in this passage I'm going to read from, the Buddha's efforts at getting rid of suffering, he tries to do that by being much too hard on himself. So the Buddha says of his experience, I thought, suppose that I, clenching my teeth and pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth, were to beat down, constrain, and crush my mind with my awareness. So clenching my teeth and pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrained, and crushed my mind with my awareness. Just as a strong man seizing a weaker man by the head or the throat or the shoulders were to beat him down, constrain, and crush him, in this same way I beat down, constrained, and crushed my mind with my awareness. As I did so, sweat poured from my armpits, and although tireless persistence was aroused in me an unmuddled mindfulness, there was a kind of sharp awareness there. Nevertheless, my body was aroused and uncalmed because of the painful exertion. So that's pretty intense. The Buddha's not done yet. He says, I thought, suppose we were to become absorbed in a trance of non-breathing. So I stopped my in-breaths and my out-breaths in my nose and mouth, and as I did so, there was a loud roaring of winds coming out of my ear holes, just like the loud roar of winds coming out of a smith's bellow. So I stopped the in-breaths and the out-breaths in my nose and mouth and ears, and as I did, extreme forces sliced through my head, just as if a strong man were slicing open my head with a sharp sword. Extreme pains arose in my head, just as if a strong man were tightening a turban made of tough leather straps around my head. Extreme forces carved up my stomach cavity, just as a butcher and his apprentice were to carve up my stomach cavity. There was an extreme burning in my body, just as if two strong men grabbing a weaker man by the arms were to roast and broil him over a pit of hot embers. And although tireless persistence was aroused in me and unmuddled mindfulness, the body was aroused and uncalmed because of the painful exertion. This stuff is like R-rated. So that at this point in the story, there's these devas watching the Buddha do this, and they comment on this. Devas, on seeing me, said, Gautama, the contemplative, is dead. Other devas said, nah, he's not dead. He's dying, though. And others said, he's neither dead nor dying. He's an arhat, for this is the way that arhats live. I love this because it's kind of like they're spectators watching extreme sport, like commentators. They're like, oh, look what he's doing now. Think he's gone? No, he's got this. He's gonna pull through. The Buddha's self-mortification continues. This one's really graphic. I'm going somewhere with this. So he says, suppose I were to take only a little food at a time, only a handful of bean soup or lentil soup or veg soup or pea soup. So I took only a little food at a time, only a handful. And my body became extremely emaciated, simply from my eating so little. My limbs became like the jointed segments of vine stems or bamboo stems. My backside became like a camel's hoof. My spine stood out like a string of beads. My ribs jutted out like the jutting rafter of an old rundown barn. The gleam in my eyes appeared to be sunk deep in my eye sockets. My scalp shriveled and withered like green bitter gourd. The skin in my belly became stuck to my spine, that when I thought of touching my belly, I grabbed hold of my spine as well. If I urinated or defecated, I fell right over on my face right there, simply from eating so little. I thought, whatever Brahmins or contemplatives in the past have felt painful, racking, piercing feelings due to their striving, this is the utmost. None have been greater than this. Whatever Brahmins or contemplatives in the past are feeling painful, racking, piercing feelings due to their striving, this is the utmost. The Buddha has gone there before. None is greater than this. But here's the clincher. But with this racking practice of austerities, I haven't attained any superior human state, any distinction in knowledge or vision worthy of the noble ones. Could there be another path to awakening? Could there possibly be another way? This doesn't seem to be working. We kind of have to go there, though, don't we? We run ourselves into the ground again and again with what doesn't work. It might be useful to just take a moment right now and ask, what am I bearing down on in my life? What do I keep playing out over and over again, only to experience once more that it doesn't bear fruit? Doesn't really help me feel better. It misses the mark. Could there possibly be another way? I was just noticing that there's my feelings of nervousness, but then there's the smell of these flowers. Chance for me to choose a little different place of awareness. So the Buddha got to that place of being open to an alternative, of having been leveled and humbled by his own self-inflicted difficulty. His own self-inflicted difficulty. He asks, what else is there? Here again from the sutras, the Buddha speaks. I recall once when my father, the Shakyan, was working, and I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree. Then, quite withdrawn from sensuality, withdrawn from unskillful mental qualities, I entered and remained in that first jhana, rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal, accompanied by applied thought and sustained thought. Could that be the path to awakening? This is really such a beautiful moment in the Buddha's process of awakening, and it contains a lot of little significant details. It also contains a lot of clues about what is the nature of this place of resource that we're looking for in our sitting practice. The quality of that zone that Joanne was describing yesterday. So to return to the story of our hero, the Buddha is completely emaciated, at death's door really, and he starts to comb his memory for a clue to a different path that he could take. In doing so, he remembers back to when he was a child. A young boy and in the care of his strong and benevolent father. So this detail is not included in the passage I read, but we know from other traditional stories of the Buddha's life that his father is depicted as kind and benevolent. In certain renderings of the story, the father is described as a spiritual practitioner himself, who is dedicated to the well-being of his people through just governance and generosity with his wealth. The Buddha's father is portrayed as the fulfillment of human potential on the material realm, whereas his son, the Buddha, becomes the fulfillment of human potential in the spiritual realm. Anyway, so the Buddha is there as a child, and nearby is his strong, capable father, who is working. What's he working for? Well, if he was the parent of a child, he's probably working to provide care and sustenance and safety for his son. So the Buddha is aware that his father is nearby, and he knows as a result he has nothing to worry about. This is a picture of a child enjoying the perfection of secure attachment parenting. So right here in the story up to this point, we have our first clue about a prerequisite for accessing this resource state of mind. And that prerequisite is some degree of safety and material care, which is in the story symbolized as the proximity of the father. The Buddha might have had something of an ideal father, but as adults, we don't get to rely on a parent in the same way that we do. We have to give this safety and sustenance to ourselves. So here's a question. If your practice was a child that needed your protection and support, if you saw it that way as something precious to care for, what would you put into place to take care of your practice? What kinds of supports would you make sure your practice had so that it could thrive? Like you would make sure a child had this thing. Some examples that Joanne offered yesterday were things like exercise to support your practice. Other things from my own experience I need is certain eating so my blood sugar stays level, my mind can be even. What I'm really working on these days is getting to bed earlier so that I have the energy for sitting practice. Taking care of the material and the realm of safety for our practice. But getting back to our story. So the Buddha recalls that he felt safe and loved as a child, and as a result, he was free to do his own child thing. And what was he doing? Well, he was wandering around in nature like kids do, looking at stuff, wondering about the world, feeling amazed at the natural beauty around him. And he's got a child's mind, right? So he enjoys a certain kind of excitement about learning and growing. I know that kids, when they're healthy, are like this because I work with preschoolers as a speech pathologist, and they're like a moth to the flame with regard to like curiosity or something new. It's just a reflex in them at that point. So in this memory the Buddha has from when he's a child, he remembers he enjoyed this easy, awake curiosity about life. And here again are some of those clues about this mind state that we're looking for. It's awake, it's easeful, it's curious. So we have the Buddha knowing his father is nearby and wandering around in nature. And he finds a tree. The text says a rose apple tree, which is traditionally depicted as by a little river. And he sits under that tree, but he's a kid, right? So he probably didn't sit, he probably laid on his back. And he gazed up into the branches, and maybe he smelled the warm grasses, and he felt the little cool breeze as it came off of the water of the river that's flowing by. And how is his mind? The text says his mind was withdrawn from sensuality and unskillful mental qualities, and as a result, it was able to enter the first jhana, or the first meditative absorption. And the text says this was characterized, this mind state, by rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal. So my take on this is, basically you have a kid who knows he's got nowhere to be and nothing to do, and he knows he can safely be on his own, and he's comfortable in his own skin and secure in his own healthy sense of growing and learning on a summer afternoon with an relaxed, alert mind. And maybe in this space some different thoughts come and go, stories and experiences. Maybe some of them are a little difficult. A nightmare he recalls, or a memory of a rebuff of a caregiver of his. But it doesn't matter. He's got time and space, and he's happy to be with himself in this timeless, warm summer afternoon. So the emaciated Buddha remembers back to this memory, and he thinks, that was great. It was innocent and good, uncomplicated and restorative, natural and easeful. Could that be the kind of mind state that can facilitate my awakening? The sutra reads again. Then the Buddha, following on that memory, came to the realization that is the path to awakening. He further thought, so why am I so afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensuality, nothing to do with unskillful mental quality? I myself get caught here too. I think it couldn't be that good. Not really allowed to rest in this way. I think something about this state is threatening to us. What is preventing us from letting go into that kind of care? The Buddha, no longer resisting this space, said, I am no longer afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensuality, nothing to do with unskillful mental qualities. But, he says, it's not so easy to achieve that pleasure with a body so extremely emaciated, so I should take some solid food. And for those of you who know the story, he does. A bowl of rice porridge. And he continues to practice from there. So in taking some time to go over the details of this story, I wanted to make the point that the mental state that relieves suffering in our practice is not only something very positive, but it's also something very accessible. This is something that we all have an experience of. Think summer vacation. Those of us who are students or educators with summers off know this space well. That feeling on the first day of summer vacation when you know you're truly done with all of your responsibilities and you can take the whole day to go for a leisurely walk in the woods or sit out in a hammock in the backyard. Or another example might be the relaxed freshness one feels on a Saturday morning, knowing you have the rest of the weekend to relax. Assuming, of course, that you got a good night's sleep on Friday. And additionally, you know that you don't have to put any pressure on yourself to be a certain way. You can leave your sweats on. You don't have to do your hair. The point is that all of us have a sense of this spacious, resourced, and alert, relaxed space. It's not something separate from what we already know and have access to. And in recognizing this, that this is indeed what we are orienting towards, and trusting that we know something of this space already, we make it more likely that we will, in fact, cultivate this space in our practice. And not just cultivate this space, but to really let it sink in and be a resource for us. I want to read again from the Pali Canon to provide evidence for the claim that this space of practice is both positive and that it's a very thorough going experience of it is fundamental on the path. So this next passage that I'm going to read is from the Maka Asapura Sutta, and is a description of the 4 jhanas, or states of meditative absorption, that the practitioner is said to need to cultivate before reaching final awakening. And when they read this, pay attention to the thoroughness of the therapeutic effect that the Buddha described. Having abandoned these 5 hindrances, defilements of the mind that weaken wisdom, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, one enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with rapture born of seclusion. The practitioner makes the rapture and happiness born of seclusion drench, seep, fill, and pervade this body, so that there is no part of the body that is not pervaded by the rapture and happiness born of seclusion. Just as a skilled bathman or a bathman's apprentice heats bath powder into a metal basin and sprinkling it gradually with water, kneads it until the moisture wets his ball of bath powder, soaks it, and pervades it inside and out. Yet the bath ball itself does not ooze. So too, a monk makes the rapture and happiness born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, and pervade this body, so that there is no part of the whole body that is not pervaded by the rapture and happiness born of seclusion. Again, monks, with the subsiding of thought and examination, one enters and dwells in the second jhana, which has internal confidence and unification of mind, is without thought and examination, and has rapture and happiness born of concentration. One makes the rapture and happiness born from concentration drench, seep, fill, pervade this body, so that there is no part of the body that is not pervaded by the rapture and happiness born from concentration. Just as though there were a lake whose waters well up from below. It had no inflow from east, west, north, or south, and would not be replenished from time to time by showers of rain. Then the cool fount of water welling up in the lake would make the cool water drench, steep, and pervade the lake, so that there would be no part of the whole lake that was not pervaded by cool water. So too, a monk makes the rapture and happiness born of concentration drench, steep, and fill, and pervade the body, so that there is no part of the whole body that is not pervaded by the rapture and happiness. Again, monks, with the fading away as well of rapture, one dwells equanimous and mindful and clearly comprehending. He experiences happiness with the body. He enters and dwells in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare he is equanimous, mindful, one who dwells happily. He makes the happiness divested of rapture, drench, seep, fill, and pervade this body, so that there is no part of the whole body that is not pervaded by the happiness divested of rapture. Just as, in a pond of blue or red or white lotuses, some lotuses that are born and grow in the water thrive immersed in the water without rising out of it, and the cool water drenches, seeps, fills, and pervades them through their tips and their roots, so that there is no part of those lotuses that is not pervaded by cool water. So too, a monk makes the happiness divested of rapture, drench, steep, fill, and pervade this body, so that there is no part of the whole body that is not pervaded by the happiness divested of rapture. Again, monks, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and dejection, a monk enters upon and dwells in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. He sits pervading this body with the bright, pure bright mind, so that there is no part of his whole body that is not pervaded by the pure bright mind. Just as though a person were sitting covered from the head down with a white cloth, so that there would be no part of the whole body that is not pervaded by a white cloth. So too, a monk sits pervading the whole body with a pure, bright mind, so that there is no part of the whole body that is not pervaded by a pure, bright mind. So from this description, we have really rich metaphors, that of bath salts in a spa-like bath with attendants, pervading the water to offer their therapeutic effect on the bather. We have the metaphor of cool water replenishing a lake from a deep earth's internal spring. We have the metaphor of a lotus flower that's so full of life-giving water, all the stems and leaves and petals that just plump with that they shine. Lastly, we have the image of a bright light completely covering the body like a protective cloth. And this morning we were sitting with mosquitoes. The population has gone way up here at Mariposa because it got hot. There was a lot of rain and then it got hot. And I was thinking that cloth was probably a mosquito covering, and how protective and relieving of suffering that would have been to a practitioner that didn't have an option to get away from them otherwise. So images that suggest a pervasive, comforting, life-giving, protective state of mind. So this is a good thing the Buddha is pointing us towards. Okay, moving towards the end of this talk, but before I wrap up, I wanted to offer a few gentle caveats or slight qualifications on what I've talked about thus far. I said this in another talk recently. Whenever you come down on one place in the Dharma, there's always another side. And when you take one position, that other side pops up and says, consider this too. So, a few qualifications. So the Buddha is describing a pleasant mind state that is removed from indulgence. The emphasis here is on indulgence in the five senses. The sutras say experiences in nature are a good guide to what we're referencing here. The enjoyable mind state that is said to come about when people go off into secluded natural spaces, like a forest, under a tree, a mountain, a hillside cave, an open field. So just to note, this is not a pleasure that one gets from overindulging. If we were comparing it to vacations, as I did earlier, we're talking more backpacking trip and less spring break. Also, the Pali Canon says that we have to abandon the five hindrances to access these mental states. Those five hindrances are listed as sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. So in order to aid this space in our cultivation, we do have to have some basic upright living and some aliveness we're bringing. This is where keeping the precepts is a supportive basis to our meditation practice. The other important point I want to make about this place of restoration is that it's not a place to set up in. That is to say, it's not a permanent place, so don't be disappointed when it comes and goes. But when practicing returning to this space, we do become more skilled at accessing it with greater and greater ease. Also, this spacious, resourced, easeful mind is not a place to protect from the outside world or a place to hide out in. You don't get to go to the beach and tell everybody else to bug off. This place that we are cultivating is for the purpose of relieving suffering. Its function is to act as a filter through which we can clean up our own personal and then the collective greed, hate, and delusion. This is why after the Buddha discovered this place for himself and took his seat under the rose apple tree, that Mara, the Lord of Delusion, or the personification of human suffering, began his onslaught. So the Buddha was sitting in that clear-minded, relaxed, equanimous repose, and within that space, Mara's visions of armies and demons and torture, and yes, pandemics and all the suffering that is involved there. The whole mass of human suffering presented itself to the Buddha. But because the Buddha was sitting in that resource place, he was able to say to the suffering, "You are not the whole of reality. I am in touch with another place, and I invite you to be soothed by it." In tomorrow's Dharma talk, we'll have a handful of people who will share on the topic of how to take this place of practice out into the world. which is ultimately where it goes. But for now, we'll stay home and enjoy the comfort practice can offer. And really relax into that sweet little spot that a little boy discovered one day when he was wandering down by the river. I invite you to sit there too and to enjoy this spot.
Can you take a few questions?
I guess so.
There's one specific one.
Maybe we could have a yes, and also maybe Joanne.
Well, no, this one is especially for you. It was Ellen who asked, I have difficulty with getting to sleep at a reasonable hour. Please tell me what you are doing to get to bed earlier.
Yeah. The question is, Ellen says she has difficulty getting to sleep at a regular hour, and she's wondering what I'm doing. Yeah, this has been an ongoing difficulty, and I'm really getting clear on how much it affects my ability to practice and kind of continue to grow in practice. I think the first place that I have gone to that helps is actually really feeling the suffering that it brings about. So I feel like that's a kind of mindfulness practice in itself. Like when I calmly say, okay, what are the effects on the body when I stayed up till 11, so going to bed at 9:30 like I wanted to, and feel those and be like, is this pleasant or neutral or painful? Like in a kind of neutral space. When I do that, it presents itself as obviously unpleasant, and that is a good motivation for actually making an intention. So then I make an intention, and I've been regularly making a vow about this. We share intentions in our Sangha on Tuesday morning, and then check in about them later. And so I make an intention. I tell people about that intention. I ask for support in that. I have someone that I like to talk to in the evening, and I've been asking this person to not to talk to me so that I go to bed earlier. The other real difficulty for me is digital devices, so phone or something on the computer, and I'm starting to recognize this is the clencher for me, and I need to get more curious about, again, how powerful it is and respect how powerful it is to make me break my greater aspiration. And I think at this point I'll probably be asking for some more support from friends. I have a friend who knows how to put things so that things shut off. I think I will need that. But I have seen growth in a positive direction along that line over the trajectory of a handful of years. So it takes time. I don't know if that was helpful.
Here's a question from Laura. It's a little long. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about the distinction, if there is any, between the jhanas and the resilient zone that Joanne shared about yesterday? Let's summarize that a little bit for the mic.
Yeah, the question is, would I be willing to talk a little bit about the distinctions between the jhanas and the resilient zone that Joanne talked about? Well, I don't want to claim ultimate authority on this. All of these are supposed to be the higher aspects of the path, so but I guess in reading them and learning more, as Joanne has talked about, this space of resiliency, my intuition is that these are not so separate from what she's describing. That they're deepening and a continuation of that kind of a space. And in having that intuition, I feel that that's quite empowering, so that we don't think this is something, as I was saying, other than what we are starting to cultivate, that we already know a little bit about, and that we can make more pervasive in our life. I think that going into some like technical descriptions of what each of those stages are, if you're interested in that, I would again recommend that website, Access to Insight, that will have very precise descriptions of all definitions of all those terms. Do you want to say anything about that, Joanne, since you're the
I think I myself am not worried about the distinction, that I'm doing my best to kind of widen that zone, to take in more and more of my experience from a more curious and less reactive space. And I think there's some nice explanation by Gunaratana in Beyond Mindfulness.
A little louder, Joanne. A little louder.
Gunaratana, I think, has described some in his book, maybe Beyond Mindfulness in plain English, something like that. So that's what I can say about that. I'm pretty focused on more basic things still. And, I hope I get to the place where I need to know the difference.
Is there another question, Jonathan?
They've stopped.
They've stopped.
Good time to transition into working medicine.
Do you want to?
I'd like to make just one comment.
Can we move the mic back over to Joanne?
Kim, I want to thank you for the talk. Both the content and the relish with which you delve in and heat up the sutras. That's quite infectious, and so appreciating our delve into the deliciousness of the text. Thank you.
Guess my thing is not a comment, but maybe not quite questions. I have to go look at it again. But I remember in different books, but especially I think in Awakening, the Heart Book of Thai, like I remember he make a distinction about like the jhanas were later added in or something because of I don't remember exactly, but there was something about because of jhana idea were more kind of popular before that, or trying to make Buddhism a bit more popular to be accepted. But I think in at least in Thai's words, he was really talking about like not chasing after the exact definition of what jhana is, or a grasping of certain state of rapture, but it's really more like in the each of the daily practice and the ease with it. So I can go look a bit more about what he said exactly, but I just remember that distinction in this tradition. He did mention something about that.
Yeah. Could I also say something about that?
And then we should bow out.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment, and I feel like in kind of bringing this to the forefront, I didn't mean to kind of advocate or emphasize a kind of like chasing after bliss exactly, but just that for myself, I missed that this was for me it was a corrective, and also that within this space of retreat, like, is a particular time to be nourished by that kind of a place. As the cat is demonstrating.
So now it's the time to move into working meditation. Perhaps we'll sing a song to move us in that direction before Joanne invites the bell to stand and bow to each other. Let's sing "The Mind Can Go in 1,000 Directions." The mind can go in 1,000 directions, but on this lovely path I walk in peace. With each step a gentle wind blows. With each step a flower blooms. The mind can go in 1,000 directions, but on this lovely path I walk in peace. With each step a gentle wind blows. With each step a flower blooms. Standing together. Bowing to each other in gratitude. And offering the merits of our practice to all bodhisattvas and to the world.
Deep relaxation at 2 o'clock.
The next Zoomed activity will be deep relaxation at 2 o'clock.
Offered by Melanie.
Until then, enjoy working meditation and mindful lunch. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. Farm?
Or
Alright.
what?
I'm gonna go change.